So once again, good morning, sisters and brothers, and our brothers and sisters at their homes, or probably some are already in their offices, now joining us in our Eucharistic celebration and morning prayer. The first question, maybe the only question for this homily is, ikaw ba ay pasaway? This term, pasaway, becomes very common nowadays, especially in our situation, in the crisis that we are facing, brought by this pandemic. And so if you go to social media, you will see them many comments about people who are pasaway. And maybe in life or in general, ikaw ba ay pasaway? Is there a stubbornness? Is there a hard-headed attitude in your heart? In the gospel for today, they want Jesus to be pasaway, to trap him, to ensnare him, so that they can accuse him, especially against the Roman government, who was very powerful during that time. And the question that they raised is about paying the census tax to Caesar. Very controversial question that if Jesus will make a wrong answer, then they could accuse him. Pasaway ang Jesus na ito. If he say, wag. No? Bakit tayo magbabayad ng buwis? Or, on the other hand, magbayad tayo. Or they may accuse that, well, you are under the government of the Romans. But then Jesus gave an answer, a beautiful answer, that will give us a lesson in life and in faith. And so we ask those who are asking him to bring him a denarius na may muka ni Caesar and maybe an inscription, a date, of when the coin was minted, telling us that, well, this is a worldly thing, a worldly affair. He is a leader. Caesar is a leader of a community, of a nation, and representing a government. And so for Jesus, let us give him what is due. And it reminds me of the attitude of our community, the church, the Christian communities all over the world. And how we cope up with this pandemic when the government asks us to lock down, when the government asks us to avoid mass gathering or the physical mass gathering. The church was so obedient. I remember when the lockdown was announced, and our diocese gave us an instruction that we cannot have a Eucharistic celebration or any celebration that we are used to have. And people immediately followed. But then, of course, there is the other desire of the people and the other point of Jesus. If we give what is Caesar's, but then we give what is God's. Pero paano? Our praises, our worship, our obedience to what God is telling us. And, here is one way of doing it, that people adhere to what the church is offering. na hindi tayo lalabas na pasaway. And of course, our attitude is for the common good of the people. Para nga naman hindi kumalat ang pandemya, but at the same time, as I said, we have to offer what is God's. And you know, sisters and brothers, especially our viewers, ang mga communities natin who are joining us in this live streaming, most of the time, we are excited to look for how many views meron tayo on a Sunday, on an ordinary day, on our morning prayer, evening prayers. Pag pumapalo na sa mga ganitong thousands, there is an internal message sending na, uy, we already reached this, 100,000, 200,000. Because of that joy, knowing that people are doing their best to give to God what is God's. Ourselves, our faith, no? Our acknowledgement that He is indeed the ruler of our lives. He is indeed what our responsorial psalm is telling us today, being God as our refuge. Ang Panginoon ang ating himlayan, ang Panginoon ang ating takbuhan. And so, with these messages that we have from the first reading, that Peter was encouraging his community of their faithfulness to God, our psalm telling us that God is indeed our refuge, and Jesus, who tells us that, well, there is a government in our midst. So give the government what is due, our obedience to the basic law. But on the other hand, also, there is a greater government that we have, and that is God's. And so, as he said, well, let us give to God what belongs to God. And you know, in my reflection, sabi ko nga, if we are created in the image and likeness of God, every time you wake up in the morning, you look at the mirror, and you're like looking at a coin. Printed there is an image and likeness of God, whether you agree or not. No? But of course, it's not only the physical, but that spirit in us, no? That God embedded in our hearts, that God is here imprinted in ourselves. And so let us give to that image what belongs to Him. Faithfulness, obedience, love for Him, and love for one another. It may be very, very challenging, but then Jesus is the wisdom of God. His words are words of life. And to end this, let me read to you a poem by Father Cezinho from Brazil. I'll read some parts of it. The poem says, I am furious, and He tells me forgive. I am afraid, and He tells me take courage. I have doubts, and He says to me, have confidence. I feel restless, and He says to me, be calm. I prefer to go my own way, and He tells me, come and follow me. I make my own plans, and He says to me, forget about them. I am towards material goods, and He says, leave them behind. I want security, and He says, I promise you absolutely nothing. I like to live my own life, and He says, lose your life. I believe I am good, and He tells me, good is not sufficient. I like to be the boss, and He says, serve. I like to command others, and He says, obey. Let me jump a little bit. No, I don't understand this Jesus. He provokes me. he confuses me. Like so many of his disciples, I too look or would like to follow another master who would be more certain and less demanding. But I experience almost the same as Peter. I do not know anyone else who has the words of eternal life. And coming from the word of eternal or words of eternal life, Jesus once again reminds us to repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. We obey when it is proper to obey, especially to our God, who is our strength, our God, as the psalmist says, our refuge.